I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close Up. It's official, Eric Adams will be New York City's 110th mayor. He swamped Curtis Sliwa in a landslide on Tuesday. Winning the Democratic primary was the heavier lift, and he won that by only a few thousand votes. In a very liberal city, at least we thought that, Adams was able to defeat progressive candidates like Maya Wiley and ran on a promise of getting tough on crime. So come January, what will his top agenda items be besides crime? Meanwhile, Governor Kathy Hochul is now facing a formidable challenger for the Democratic nomination. State Attorney General Letitia James has declared her candidacy for governor, and she apparently won't be the only other Democrat to jump into the race. Governor Andrew Cuomo has been hit with misdemeanor charges of sexual misconduct. He has to appear in court later this month. Plenty of New York political news to talk about this week. We're joined by Dana Rubinstein, Metro political reporter for the New York Times. Dana, let's look at the mayoral results first. 67% or so of the vote for Eric Adams. About 1 million people voted in this election. What does the turnout mean? What does the vote mean? When I took a quick look at those numbers, it appeared that no Democrat since John Hyland in 1917 was elected with fewer Democratic votes than Eric Adams. It looked like the turnout was somewhere under 20%, as best we could figure out without absentee ballots. What kind of mandate is this for Eric Adams?
I mean, I'm sure he will construe it as a significant mandate, given the sort of the proportion of the vote that he got, even if the actual total vote was fairly small. I mean, de Blasio certainly did that after he won in 2013. But there was something about yesterday's election that felt a little bit like a pretend election. I mean, the actual sort of outcome was decided in June with the Democratic primary, and I think a lot of people just didn't bother to vote. I think a lot of people also, who among the progressive Democratic wing of the party weren't particularly energized to vote by Eric Adams, who's more of a center Democratic candidate.
So center that the New York Post, even the New York Sun, were endorsing him or supporting him. Explain to me, though, not to demean anyone in this conversation, but how did Curtis Sliwa do better than Joe Lhota did in running a couple of times ago? Joe Lhota, a class candidate, Curtis Sliwa, again, and not to demean him, I guess I'm doing that in saying this, but certainly not someone who most people would take seriously as a mayoral candidate.
Well, I think Curtis had something going for him that Joe Lhota did not, which is that he was able to tap into the outrage among some segments of New York society about the mayor's vaccine mandate for municipal workers. So there's a lot of energy around that, a lot of protests, and Curtis was at all of those protests, and I think that helped him get votes that he might not otherwise have gotten.
Eric Adams' mandate or not certainly won in a landslide. He is going to be the next mayor. What is he likely to do come January 1st that would be different from what we've seen in 8 years of Mayor de Blasio?
Well, he has promised in his first 30 days to reconstitute the plainclothes anti-crime, anti-gun unit, which de Blasio disbanded because it was involved in a lot of violence. He has also promised to be a significantly more business-friendly candidate. It's not clear precisely what that means at this point, although he has spoken favorably of giving government incentives to businesses, something that de Blasio purported to be against, even though he was part of the deal to give Amazon incentives to put its headquarters in Queens. So those are two big distinctions. I think he's also, as last night demonstrated, is going to be really out and about. He's going to make himself part of New York City's nightlife. He spent most of last night out socializing. And I think he's sort of gearing up to be a cheerleader and active participant in that nightlife.
Speaking of being out and about, we presume starting January, he's going to live in Gracie Mansion. Where is he living now?
Well, first, I'm not sure that presumption is entirely correct. He was asked about that on Bloomberg Media, and he said he hasn't decided yet, and he'll likely spend maybe some time there and some time maybe sleeping at City Hall and some time maybe in Brooklyn. It's
But
always
not New Jersey.
he
Not
didn't
New
mention New
Jersey.
Jersey. I think we can assume if he is still in this long-term relationship with his partner who lives in Jersey, that he'll also stay in Jersey, but that's an issue he doesn't like to discuss or talk about. Obviously, as you alluded to, the issue of where he lays his head at night has been one of the weirder aspects of this campaign. There's a lot of opacity around it. I don't know how much it matters, but we don't really know exactly.
I think it's something we should know one way or the other. Dana, during the primary campaign, he had praise for some of his opponents. Is there any likelihood he will appoint any of them to his administration?
I don't think so. He's been asked about that a bunch, and he always says no. He seems like someone who isn't eager to engage with his former opponents in that sort of a way. He's talked a lot about this notion that he will hire people who have a high emotional intelligence quotient. That seems to be something I'm not sure precisely what that means, but he seems to be looking elsewhere for his administrative appointment.
What does that mean? Empathy? What are we talking about?
Yeah, he talks about empathy. He talks about how academic credentials aren't necessarily an all be all for determining who he's going to appoint. I mean, what that means in practice, we'll find out soon enough, I guess. But that is a word he keeps using in regard to his administration.
Who is he going to for advice? So we've seen that he has talked during the campaign to Mayor Bloomberg. Anyone else that we know he's speaking to get caught up on the latest in city affairs?
Yeah, well, he has been honestly speaking to everyone. He's been approaching this whole transition a bit like a research project. As far as his inner circle is concerned, he explicitly thanked 4 people last night, and they're likely to continue to play major roles moving forward. One is his communications director, Evan Thies. Another is his deputy borough president, Ingrid Martin, who is married to, or was married, I'm not sure if he's still alive, but married to Eric Adams' first police partner. Nathan Smith, who was involved in his campaign. So he's got a tight-knit cohort of people that he relies upon for advice. And then he does seem to speak to quite a few people outside of his circle, including Michael Bloomberg, including Joe Lhota. So yeah, he's got a pretty wide circle of advisors.
This is the first time, at least in my memory, that all 3 citywide officials are from Brooklyn. Obviously, the public advocate is remaining in office, but we have, as you pointed out in the Times, Brad Lander, the new controller. We also have a city council that is new, and we don't know yet who the speaker is. How is that dynamic going to affect the mayoralty of Eric Adams? The new controller, the new city council, how will that affect what he is able to do as mayor?
It's a good question. I mean, the relationship between Jumaane Williams, the public advocate, and Brad Lander, the incoming controller, seems like a very tight one. And they're both closely aligned with the progressive wing of the Democratic Party in New York City. So there is one strain of thinking that they will act as something of a liberal bulwark against the Adams administration. The content of the council seems a bit more up in the air. It seems like quite a few seats have turned, not quite a few, but more than expected, have turned Republican. One of the most prominent would-be speakers of the city council, someone who is campaigning very hard for it, his seat appears to be possibly in doubt, actually. Justin Brannan from Bay Ridge, at last I looked, it was 50-50 with not all the votes counted. So I think the makeup of the council is a bit up in the air. But it does seem like from a citywide perspective, Lander and Williams will probably find themselves on opposite sides of many debates with Adams.
You wrote a terrific piece in the Times recently about Bill de Blasio filling some last minute interim vacancies with friends, supporters, contributors. What's wrong with that?
It depends on who you ask. I mean, if you believe in the value of like a technocracy, the idea that people who run administrative agencies should have subject matter expertise and proven ability, you might be the kind of person who takes issue with that sort of thing. If you're someone who believes that, I mean, there's also an argument to be made that individual departments can benefit from having someone who might not have subject matter expertise, but does have a direct line to the mayor and has proven their loyalty to the mayor. It's not something that good government groups look kindly on, but it's a controversial issue.
Let's turn to the gubernatorial campaign. Is there any way at this point, and of course we're talking about next year, which is a lifetime in politics, to handicap that race? Of course, we're looking only at the Democratic primary at this point. Kathy Hochul is in that race. Some polls, believe it or not, show former Governor Cuomo in second place in polls. Letitia James announced her candidacy, others planning to run as well. Who's ahead and why? Or doesn't it even matter at this point?
You could argue that Hochul and Tish James are the two premier candidates. Hochul because she has the power of incumbency and is a very energetic, active campaigner. And Tish James because of her prominence and her prominence in the progressive side of the Democratic Party. But I mean, honestly, I think the only thing we can be sure of at this point is that it's going to be a total mess, not that dissimilar from the mayoral primary, frankly, because you're just going to have so many candidates, many of them vying for sort of overlapping slices of the electorate. I think it's going to be a real show.
Does Bill de Blasio, who seems to be pointing toward a run, have any constituency whatsoever in New York City, much less New York State?
He has some constituency in sort of central Brooklyn. The problem is that that constituency would seem to overlap a bit with both Jumaane Williams's and Tish James's. So I'm sure his advisors would tell you that there is some sort of path to victory, and maybe there is. Maybe he feels like he has nothing left to lose, but it does not seem like an easy win for him, certainly.
Dana, looking back at the mayoral campaign, can you point to anything that actually made a difference? And I mean, going back through the primaries, was it debates? Was it money? Was it the issue of defunding or not defunding the police? Was it party loyalty? Was it the current mayor, gender, the phenomenon of a runoff? What was it, if anything, that proved to be pivotal in this mayoral election year?
I think the general feeling of disorder in the city, coupled with the tabloids' amplification of that notion, sometimes perhaps at the expense of what may or may not have actually been happening on the ground. I think that really played to Eric Adams's benefit. And if in the end the narrative was all about disorder in New York City and the need to crack down on disorder, there was really no way to out-cop and ex-cop. There was no one else who could win. In the end, that seems like that's what happened. I mean, in the beginning, it seems like there was a need for a cheerleader, and that sort of made Andrew Yang's campaign a going concern. But I think in the end, it was all about disorder.
Again, we don't want to predict because strange things happen in politics, but is Andrew Cuomo's political career over?
He's got $18 million in the bank and some pretty steadfast supporters. He's got a lot of crossover appeal, I think, to sort of moderate voters upstate. Is it over? I kind of doubt it, but I don't. It's hard to say. This misdemeanor criminal complaint doesn't help any, I suppose, though he's arguing that he's a martyr. So maybe that argument will hold sway among a lot of people. I don't know.
And by most counts, a pretty good record as governor. My thanks to Dana Rubinstein of the New York Times. And coming up next, Texas versus abortion rights, voting rights, vaccine and mask mandates. What is going on in the Lone Star State? We'll hear from the Times' Houston bureau chief. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments this week on two challenges to a Texas law that bans most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy. The law allows anyone to sue anybody who helps with an abortion, even an Uber driver who takes a woman to a clinic. The High Court has to decide if abortion providers and the Justice Department can challenge the law. From the justice's questions, it sounded like they will allow legal challenges. But there's a lot more controversy in Texas. Governor Abbott signed a law putting tough new restrictions on voting rights. After pressure from Donald Trump, he also announced a full forensic audit of the 2020 election in 4 counties, even though Trump won the state by a big margin. Abbott also barred COVID vaccine mandates, but 2 major airline headquartered in the state rejected the order. He also banned transgender student athletes from participating in girls' sports. Is all this sincere policy, or is it pure red meat politics? We're joined by David Goodman, the Times' Houston bureau chief. David, I guess there is no joy in Houston this weekend after the Baseball World Series. I learned a little bit of history the other day. The Atlanta Braves, who I think used to be the Boston Braves, were named by a former Tammany chieftain from New York, and they were named in honor of Tammany, the Indian Tammany. So there you go. That's something you can fool your Atlanta fans with. Tell me, what is going on in Texas, and why is the governor being this conservative, this red meat conservative in the state, and how is that playing?
It's a good question. I mean, you have to go back a little bit and look at sort of what happened in the 2020 election. In Texas, there was a real push by Democrats to try not only to win the state for Joe Biden. That seemed like a long shot, but they really had high hopes that they could flip a lot of the state house seats and make progress in taking back the legislature. That's something that happened in 2018 during the run of Beto O'Rourke, when he nearly toppled Ted Cruz, and that gave a lot of Democrats hope. And what you saw after that was that Republicans in the state house actually moderated their positions. And so everyone was kind of looking to 2020 to see, well, what's going to happen in Texas this time around? You had a lot of national spending in Texas on races. And what ended up happening is that Republicans held all their seats that were being challenged by Democrats. They win the state by nearly 6 points for Donald Trump. And the Democrats don't make any inroads really anywhere, and in fact start to lose some ground in the border regions. And so that really emboldened Republicans to say, well, look, Democrats took their best shot, probably a high water mark in 2018, and we ran on a conservative platform, and we're going to govern. The voters have spoken, and we're going to govern in a conservative way. And so you really saw that in the legislative session, which was one of the most conservative that the state had seen in quite some time, if not in memory. And they followed that up with 3 special sessions that, one of them was sort of stymied by Democrats who didn't want the voting restrictions put into place. They eventually were in a second special session. Then a third one was called to do the transgender restrictions on athletes. And so you really just had a kind of almost a year of very hard right legislation coming out of the State House here.
I thought there was a changing demographic in Texas, perhaps more people moving into the state, more Latinos in the state, and that was going to change party affiliation, perhaps change the mood politically. Has that happened at all?
I mean, the demographic change is happening. And that's certainly something that Democrats had looked at and thought, this is why the state is trending in our direction. And to be fair, the state has been trending statewide towards Democrats when you look at sort of presidential and Senate runs. Which is why Democrats are continuing to maintain hope that the state will become purple at some point. But that point is not here yet. And in the meantime, the Republicans are really taking advantage of stumbles by the Biden administration and other sort of structural advantages that they have in the redistricting to really harden their position and keep that what people hope will be an eventual blue wave from cresting. And it should be said that Democrats in Texas have hoped for flipping the state for quite some time, for probably more than a decade. And the state has been majority minority for nearly 2 decades, and yet it remains in Republican hands.
Are these all cultural issues, culture war issues that are being waged in Texas, or are there, I hate to say, any real substantive issues on the agenda too?
And there are substantive issues, but many would say that they haven't really taken the precedence that they need to. I mean, lost in this last session was legislation that tried to address the horrible winter blackout that took over the entire state, a state known for its energy production, and that caused at least 200 something lives, if not far more. How you calculate that is a little bit up for debate. But there was legislation to deal with that. That was really what was on the front of mind for every Texan that was shivering and cold for nearly a week, wondering how this could happen here. And they took some steps. They didn't go as far as some people wanted, but that really was a kind of back burner issue, if you can believe it, to all these more red meat cultural issues that banning critical race theory in school and limiting social media, the kinds of restrictions on speech that they would say are put in place by social media companies for people on the right. So that was the kind of thing that the governor seemed the most focused on. And that's because that's what's coming from his primary opponents. That's really the other part of what's going on here, is that the governor for the first time has a pair of, while not serious, at least well-funded and aggressive primary opponents. And he's been very seemingly responsive to what they've been saying.
From opponents from the right? Or
From the right, excuse me, yes. Yes, they're both hard right primary opponents who are challenging him, saying he's not conservative enough.
How much farther right can they be?
Sorry.
I'm sorry, how much farther right can they be?
Well, they have been, one of his opponents, Don Huffines, who's a former state senator, had been challenging Abbott to, build a border wall. And so soon after, a governor comes out and says, I'm going to fund, with Texas money, a border wall. They had, one of his opponents had said, you need to ban these mandates by businesses. And afterwards, the governor comes out and says, I'm going to ban vaccine mandates by businesses in Texas. So you really see the governor responding as each of these candidates try to outflank him on the right, and he just goes where they are.
What about the Democratic opponents or the potential ones?
We're likely to see, all signs are pointing to Beto O'Rourke jumping into the governor's race. Now, he hasn't announced yet. He's made, he's been calling around. People have been talking about it. It seems as if he's the likeliest challenger on the left. No one else has actually jumped in at this point to challenge him, but that will really be that will define a lot if he gets into this race of the future of Texas, because right now you have essentially the governor tending to his right flank and really ignoring the opinions of a sort of centrist Texas voter who Beto O'Rourke may be able to steal away from him. But we'll see how that race comes out if it's the one that we get here.
Very quickly, can you tell us, what does a woman in Texas do now who wants or needs an abortion?
Well, it depends on when she finds out that she's pregnant. And what we've seen, and we've had reporting on this, that abortions in the state have fallen by about 50%, which is dramatic and dire for many women, but not as bad as some had thought. Many had thought that this law would effectively end abortion for almost 80 or 90% of procedures. So I think what we're seeing is that women are being more proactive about finding out when they're pregnant, going in within this 6-week window. And if they find out that they're not eligible, then abortion providers and others are trying to help them find ways to go out of state to Oklahoma or to other places where there are still clinics available to them.
Is there anything else on the Texas legislative agenda that people are worried about? As you say, the governor seems to be picking one issue after another. Is there anything else coming?
Well, the folks on his right are clamoring for a 4th special session, which people in Austin are already tired of having 3. This is a part-time legislature, so they're not used to being around except for half a year every 2 years.
They're not used to working, huh?
Well, they actually are only paid something like, I think it's some number of thousands of dollars, not very much. And so they all have side jobs they've been neglecting, they would say, to go and do these special sessions. So the governor's challenger wants a 4th special session. What he wants to do is, he's not satisfied with the audit that the governor has announced of 4 counties in the 2020 election. He wants an audit of all of the 2020 election. and various things like that. Whatever the governor's done, he'll push a little bit further to the right. Have more border security, have more sort of militarization of the border. And so he's still under pressure to do some of those things.
Very, very quickly, one sentence. How do you enforce a no mandate policy against private companies on the vaccine?
Well, very simply, they're not enforcing it right now. And so many of the businesses are still going their own way on that.
Okay, that was quick. Thank you, David. David Goodman of the New York Times in Houston. And for the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts.